Over my time in the industry, I've used about every level of wireless video that's on the market, from the super low budget stuff to the systems that cost as much or more than this van. I've been really curious about Accsoon's new wireless video systems, and so I've been using them for the last 4 months or so. My biggest question I wanted to answer was, could this replace a high-end system, or at least can it be usable on a professional set? Today we're going to answer that. First, we're going to talk about the behind the scenes and the history of these wireless units. Then we're going to talk about the differences of the units, some of the pros and cons of this unit, and then where I think that this unit sits in the industry. If you're new here, my name's Keaton. I am a DP based in Oklahoma. I also developed this app called CineTemp. CineTemp's a quick way to calculate the white balance of a location. And new in version 2.0, we're also able to calculate the ND needed for a given scene. Just as a disclaimer, Accsoon sent me some of this system to test, and then some of the system I bought with my own money. They have no say in this video whatsoever, because obviously I'm invested into it. But let's dive into section 1, which is the history of wireless and why I even wanted to test this system. This section might be a little bit long in the tooth, but I'm going to do my best just to hit the key points that I think are very valuable for this conversation. When it comes to wireless video, you basically have two different camps. You have your MMON-based systems, and then you have your Wi-Fi-based systems. Your MMON-based systems are the wireless systems that are $8,000 to $30,000 depending on the system, and then your Wi-Fi-based systems can be anywhere between $400 to $2,500 depending on how you're building them out. For history, let's talk about MMON really quick. So MMON is a company that was founded in 2004, and essentially their claim to fame is that they created a chipset that had 0 millisecond video delay. The MMON-based systems were used in several different brands, especially early on: Hollyland, Vaxis, Teradek, etc. So you had a lot of wireless video systems early on that had a 0 millisecond delay because they were using these MMON-based chips. Fast forward to 2018, the MMON chipset and company, trademarks, etc. were bought by the Vitech Group, and in 2022, the Vitech Group is now known as Vididum. If you don't know anything about this company, they are a huge conglomerate that owns a lot of different video-based companies. For example, they own companies like Audix, Rycote, Colorama, Savage, Superior, Teradek, Wooden Camera, Lowepro, Sackler, Gitzo, Avenger, Light Panels, Manfrotto, Quasar Science, Anton Bauer, Viton, and even more companies than that. All that being said, all this technology and these chipsets are now prioritized for Teradek. I'm not sure if they still license it out or whatever, but that's kind of the definition and why some of these systems have 0 millisecond delays and some of them are 20 to 30 second delays. But there's no perfect system in my opinion. I have the Vaxis Storm system. It's a really good system. It uses these chips. It has 0 millisecond delay. It's got really high quality images. However, there is times where I want to hand an iPad to a director or just have an all-in-one unit. And I don't necessarily want to invest $3,000, $5,000 into a director's monitor. That's where some of these Wi-Fi based systems start to play. And my biggest question was, will these perform on professional sets? Is this a good middle ground between some of the higher end stuff and then some of the super low end stuff? For reference, I also have the DJI SDR system. I thought that might be my fix for this style of unit, but I've had some issues with overheating, and in recent firmware updates, the iPad app has become glitchy and freezing, etc. And so that hasn't been a go-to unit for me as of late. And that's what initially attracted me to trying the Accsoon system. And then what pushed me over the edge was the Accsoon M7 Pro. And just for context, so you know where I'm coming from, a lot of the times I'm doing large or medium-sized commercial sets, running gun tourism work, and I'm using wireless primarily for a wireless video feed for client, video village, director, and then there's times where we have an AC pulling off the wireless set, which we did do with this system. And just to set this up, I think that this may be one of the first economical units that is probably worth being on a professional set, but let's get into why I think that's the case. First, let's dive into the M7 Pro. Now, this is my favorite handheld monitor I've ever used. I think it's hands down one of the better director monitors that's probably ever existed. Now, I love my Portkeys HS8. It's really good and I'm still using that. But this system is all in one and it comes color calibrated out of the box. Color calibration is obviously something that's very important. I try to calibrate my monitors as much as I can, especially whenever it's monitors that are on set and clients are critically looking at it. Now, having a director's monitor that's color calibrated is even better because then I know my director is getting a color calibrated, accurate image whenever they're looking at it for 10 or 12 hours. This monitor is also very feature rich and it has as many or more features than a lot of the higher end units that I own or that I've used. This monitor's got stuff like waveform, vector scope, false color, peaking, LUTs, multiple frame guides, but I think that the overall shining point of this monitor is its usability and its user interface. If you've ever used the Accsoon C app, that's exactly what you're experiencing on this monitor, because this monitor runs on a base of Android. And so whenever it's receiving the footage, it's putting everything through the Accsoon C app. So you've got all of those tools right at your hand. And in addition to that, what's really cool is they're constantly updating this thing. Since I've had it in 4 months, I've had 2 or 3 different firmware versions, and each time it gets better. In the most recent firmware update on this monitor, they also improved the H.265 encoding. They added the ability to transmit from the monitor, so you can transmit directly from this monitor to different devices. And then they also added camera control. All of these features getting into a monitor that's $899 seems pretty unbelievable, especially given the price. You would think that there's some drawbacks, some reliability issues, or some quirks. And honestly, over the 4 months that I've had it, there has been some reliability issues maybe early on in the early firmware, but now on this newest firmware, there hasn't been any issues. And what's really cool, especially with the camera control, is you're able to do touch to focus. And so you could give an AC, if you're using autofocus lenses, this wireless video unit, and they could touch whenever you have to shift focus points. That's a pretty cool feature. There's something else that I really love about this monitor is the battery life. For reference, with my Portkeys HS8 and the DJI SDR, whenever I had 2 of these small rig NPF batteries in there, it would last about 5 to 6 hours, primarily because the SDR just drains battery. Because whenever I put the Accsoon receiver on the HS8, then I'm able to get anywhere upwards of 8 hours. Now on the flip side, on the Accsoon M7 Pro, whenever I'm using these small rig NPF batteries, I'm able to get 10 plus hours with that monitor, which is insane because I can go an entire shoot day and I can just have 2 batteries on the monitor. And so whenever we're out on location, or if we have to hike to a location, it's just less weight and less management that we have to do on our end. And now my favorite way to use this monitor is as a director's monitor. I'm not sure that there's a better all-in-one system. Eventually I'd like to get a second one for my gaffer because it just reduces friction on set, and it's just power efficient, it's easy, and it's color accurate. Now let's move on to section 3, which is going to be all about the CineMaster 4K system. This is a really important system because this is where our image is piping through, because I like to use these all as a cohesive system, not just individual units. So whenever we talk about the CineMaster 4K, first let's talk about the image quality. I think that this is something unique because the image quality whenever I first got the unit was really good, and then there was a firmware update, and then the image quality got a little bit muddy. It was having some blockiness, and I've seen that in other reviews. And then on the most recent firmware update, the image quality is great, and in fact it's really good. They added the ability to do H.265 encoding, and that got rid of a lot of the banding that we were seeing in H.264. So in H.264 we were having some blockiness and some compression. You could really see the compression artifacts, and then whenever they added the ability to do H.265, the image improved dramatically. That being said, there is still some compression artifacts. Every video system is going to compress video in some way so that it can encode it and decode it as quickly as they can. But I think that the H.265 is a massive step in the right direction. With that in mind, every system having to compress the video in some way, what I found is that the system tends to like a Rec. 709 image more than it likes a log image. And just for reference, and so that you can be the judge of the image, I'm going to put a few different images up on screen. At first I won't tell you what they are, but from the units, they're going to be the Accsoon CineMaster, the SDR, or the Vaxis Storm system. I'm recording all of these with the Atomos Ninja in 422HQ to avoid any more compression than is already there. Hopefully by watching those, you have a guess of which one you think is which. Now I'm going to play them back and I'm going to label which one is which. Now let's talk about the latency of this unit. Latency is one of the big things that everybody talks about when it comes down to a wireless video system, and rightfully so. My biggest question when it comes to latency is, can you pull off of it? The short answer is yes, but let's dive into it. As we talked about earlier, the 0 millisecond systems are reserved for the higher end systems. These systems have a 20 to 30 millisecond delay, but I've been happy with that, and I want to talk about why. Let's put this into perspective. So 20 to 30 milliseconds is the equivalent of about 2 to 3 frames, or the average time it takes a human to blink their eye. That's not really a deal breaker in terms of latency. The director, the AC, in general, aren't really noticing this delay. A lot of times whenever I'm doing commercials, we're taking scenes 1, 2, 3 times, but the delay that's 20 to 30 milliseconds is not necessarily perceivable a lot of the times for ACs because of the type of shots that I'm doing. I'm not doing these NASCAR insanely fast moves. A lot of the times it's just somebody walking towards camera. And so at that point, it's just the AC getting their rhythm down more than it is hitting critical focus because the system had a delay. Now, of course, when we get into the higher end systems and the higher end units and the higher end commercials and movies and stuff like that, the 0 millisecond delay for an AC is going to be something that's going to be requested and probably required. However, for this particular unit, I'm talking to the mass majority of people that are out working on these medium-sized commercial sets or small films. All that being said, of course, 0 milliseconds is going to be the standard, and that's going to be what somebody wants, but can you pull on 20 to 30 milliseconds delay? I would encourage you to try it. My team has been able to do it, and it hasn't really been an issue so far. So next, let's talk about reliability. This is a really big one for me because my Vaxis system never had an issue at all. Unless I tried to double up wireless systems and add the iPad, then I would have some weird interferences. But the Vaxis system was really good, and that chipset was really reliable, and I still have it and use it sometimes. However, whenever I moved into the new Wi-Fi system, like we talked about with the SDR, I was having issues with overheating and then some connectivity issues, etc. This unit has been overall very reliable. Now, that's a caveat because there was a firmware in the middle where the reliability was not as good as it was on the bookends. So the very beginning was very reliable, the middle was a little bit less reliable, and then the most recent firmware is very reliable. And that's something that I think is worth taking note of, that if you're getting into the system, maybe keep an eye on what other users are experiencing with the current firmware before you upgrade. All that being said, the issues that I had with reliability on this unit were in the second firmware, and it would be whenever one unit or one receiver would disconnect from the transmitter, and then it almost felt like it had to rebuild the mesh network. And so then every receiver was kicked off, and then it was rebuilt with the new receivers. Now, in the new firmware, I haven't had that issue. I've had different receivers just disconnect, and then it didn't feel like it had to rebuild that mesh network. And so I think that that was something that was fixed or at least improved in the newest firmware. All that being said, I haven't had any other reliability issues with the unit. No heat issues, no connectivity issues other than what we talked about, and then especially no issues with the iPad or the iPhone apps. Those have been rock solid. And that's a big bonus because there's a lot of times where I'm just checking something quickly on my phone, or I hand an iPad to a gaffer or to the HMU, etc. And that brings me to the next subsection of this section, which is multi-device monitoring, and that's a big one. Accsoon did improve and add more receiver capabilities for the transmitters in the most recent firmware update, but the thing that I love about this is not only being able to go to the dedicated receivers, which are very good and reliable, but you're also able to add in the iPhones, the iPads, or different Android devices like we talked about. I've even had some sound operators connect to it when they're not able to be in the room or by a monitor. Now, something that's really interesting that I want to note right here is I've had several unprompted responses and notes from clients or directors telling me that this is probably their favorite all-in-one system.
Dude, I like that wireless up a lot.
This wireless monitor?
Yeah, that's the best thing I've held so far.
Well, I think it's just because it's easy to use, it's reliable, and it just has a good enough or a good image quality. It's not something that has caused any issues or caused massive delays, and so I think that people are taking note of it. Next, I want to talk about rigging this system to your camera because it is a bigger system than some of the other wireless units that I've used in the past. So for me, a lot of the times I'm shooting on the Sony Burano, and on this particular unit, I got their saddle, which is basically a V-mount sandwich. And what's really cool about this saddle is that it actually passes battery data through to the camera, unlike the Tilted D box that I have. So through that saddle, you're able to see your battery percentage and battery data, which is really cool because that's something that the Tilted D box did not have. Now, the unit itself is a little bit bigger, but through this saddle, it fits perfectly on the Burano. It's almost an exact width thing, even though it looks like a bit of a antenna Christmas tree. The width is a little bit wider and the height is a little bit taller, but whenever you build it all out, it doesn't necessarily add much weight or much size to the Burano. It just kind of fits snugly in there. Now, if I didn't have this sandwich, I'm not sure necessarily how I would rig it up without it being a little bit more intrusive, but I do love that for the Burano build. Now, when I'm using the Tilt-A-Ring and the FX3 and the RAW recorder, I've been using it a few different ways. So the first way was just putting it up to the right. I just have these digital photo mounts where I screw it in. Now, the second way is I got this new NPF sandwich where the NPF mounts to the monitor and then the NPF also mounts to the wireless receiver, and that's been really cool, and that's probably the fastest way that I know how to swap between different cameras. the only flaw that I found with this saddle is that there is a little bit of play between the battery and the camera body, but I got a tip from one of my buddies, Easton, who got a tip from a sound guy, and he said if you just put a little bit of soft side Velcro on the back side of that mount, that fixes that issue, and it did. So the reality of this system is, yes, it's a larger unit, it's got a large antenna array, but I haven't necessarily had an issue rigging it up to different cameras, and it hasn't really been obtrusive. I think it's a fair trade-off for what you're getting with the unit. Now let's move on to section 5, which is the real comparison people care about. This one's important to me, and I think it's probably one of the bigger questions I wanted to answer of where does this system actually fit in day-to-day shooting life. Now, let's start with the 0 millisecond delay systems. Obviously, those are going to be the best-in-class latency. They're robust, they're reliable, but on the con side, they come in at a pretty high price tag, anywhere from $8,000 to $30,000 depending on the system, and those are going to be reserved for our broadcast, our larger commercials, our movies, etc. That being said, if you're a smaller owner-operator and you don't necessarily want to invest in a system like that, then we're left picking our favorite Wi-Fi based system. So let's start with the Accsoon CineMaster 4K. The Accsoon CineMaster, let's start with cons, has slight latency and a slightly compressed image, especially depending on the compression that you choose. Now on the pro side, they're fairly affordable and reliable, and they probably have the best director monitor system that's ever been integrated directly into a wireless video system of this category. And then lastly, they have multi-device support, iPhone, iPads, Android devices, etc. Now, who is this particular unit for? I think if you're looking at getting into a wireless unit, especially for the first time, this is a really good place to start. I think that this covers probably 90 to 95% of the filmmakers that are out there. I think that there is a top category that will always require and need the best. However, I think that there's a category of filmmakers, and probably the mass majority of filmmakers, that could use a system like this and not necessarily have any issues. Now, these are all my own experiences. I've seen other people have a lot of compression issues, etc. I haven't necessarily ever noticed that except for one location, and that was on a previous firmware. Lastly, I want to talk about the DJI SDR system because I had a review on that a little bit earlier. Now, on the con side, I think it's probably comes down to reliability in terms of overheating and then reliability of the app. On the pro side, it does give you the ability to use apps. It's got a really good range, and the image quality I think is arguably pretty good, especially given the price. Now, who do I think that that's units for? I think that it's good for commercial filmmakers. I think that it's good for weddings and indie. However, I would say if you have a lot of eyes on your monitors, then I wouldn't necessarily opt for that to be your only system just because of the overheating issues that I've experienced in the past. All that being said, if you want the highest end video system or you want to invest in that, then that's great. I think that those are obviously very good and they have a place in the market, but I don't think that's necessarily the people watching this video at this point. I think the reason to buy this particular unit would not necessarily be because of the price, although it's got a fairly competitive price. I think it would be because of the workflow that is included in this system. I think the M7 Pro really just knocks this system up. This particular system, especially with the M7 Pro, has made my shoots just a little bit smoother overall. I didn't know what I was going to be getting into with this system, but surprisingly it's become my go-to unit over the last few months. My name's Keaton, and I am sharing my journey and what I've learned along the way. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue growing together, consider subscribing. This is just the beginning of the conversation.